The chamber that was never meant to be found. 47 steps beneath the temple of Amun. The world ends quietly. There is no sudden drop, no dramatic gate to mark the boundary between worship and what hides beneath it. The descent is deliberate, narrow, and suffocating, carved directly into bedrock so ancient that even the priests no longer remember who ordered it cut. Each step is shallow, forcing the body to move slowly, as if the stone itself is teaching submission. By the time the passage levels out, the air is colder, heavier, and stale in a way that tells the lungs this place was never meant for breathing people. This is not a prison. Prisons are built to hold bodies. This chamber was built to dismantle minds. It is approximately 1214 BCE, during the reign of Ramesses II, and the woman being led downward has already been erased once. Her name is Khyr of Mitanni, though no one below the temple will use it. She is 22 years old, educated, multilingual, the daughter of a provincial governor, captured during Egypt's campaigns in Syria. 31 days ago, she belonged to a world governed by family, seasons, and stars. That world is already gone. The priests ensured it died during transport. She was kept alone, underfed but not starved, allowed just enough strength to remain conscious and just enough isolation to make silence feel normal. This was not cruelty. It was calibration. When Khyr arrives at Karnak, she is not sorted with other captives. She is examined like material. Physicians record her body in meticulous detail. Priests provoke her with sudden noises, invasive questions, calculated humiliations, watching closely for anger instead of collapse. Her resistance is noted, not as defiance, but as potential. In temple records that survive only in fragments, there is a phrase repeated again and again. A vessel must contain something before it can be emptied. Khyr's intelligence, her discipline, her refusal to beg, these are not liabilities. They are the reason she is selected. Her file is marked with a symbol that means transfer to the lower chambers. It also means there will be no witnesses. The chamber she is brought into has no windows, no corners soft enough to rest the eyes, no markings that suggest time. In the center lies an obsidian altar, black and reflective, its surface cold even in torchlight, fitted with leather restraints polished smooth by use. The smell is wrong incense layered over something metallic and organic, the lingering evidence of procedures that do not belong in temples. 7 priests enter and form a circle. Their chant is not meant to be understood. It is meant to disrupt, to deny the mind any stable rhythm. At the center stands the high priest, a man who has worked in this chamber for decades. He does not look at Khyr as a captive, a sinner, or even a sacrifice. He looks at her the way an artisan looks at raw material before shaping begins. In surviving records, he describes her condition clinically: responsive, resistant, suitable for extended protocol. Khyr is strapped to the altar before she is told why she is here. The straps bite into skin already weakened by travel. She realizes, with a clarity that makes her chest tighten, that this place does not exist to punish disobedience or extract confession. It exists to produce outcomes. Above ground, Egypt presents itself as a civilization obsessed with eternal life. Down here, eternity means something else entirely. It means systems perfected over centuries, repeated without mercy, hidden because even those who built them understood that if the truth surfaced, reverence would collapse. As the chanting grows louder and the torches dim, Khyr understands the first and most important rule of the chamber beneath the temple. Survival is not the same as remaining yourself. And most who survive do not do both. The severing begins. The priests call the first stage the severing, and they use the word without poetry because poetry would imply feeling. Severing is not an event. It is a sequence, a set of procedures designed to remove anything that allows a person to recognize herself across time. Khyr learns this when the chamber's lamps are adjusted to burn dimly but continuously, erasing night without granting day. Sleep becomes shallow and unreliable. Hunger is introduced carefully, never enough to weaken the body beyond use, always enough to thin thought into a dull ache. The chanting returns at irregular intervals, not to mark hours, but to prevent the mind from finding patterns. When patterns vanish, memory loosens. That is the point. They begin with exposure, not for shame, but for control. Her linen is removed piece by piece while the priests circle, their voices rising and falling in a dialect older than the temple itself. She is forbidden to cover herself. Choice is the first thing to die. Then comes the hair. Every strand, everywhere, removed slowly with copper blades and pumice stone, a process that takes hours because speed would end it too quickly. She is ordered not to cry out. Each time pain surges, and she suppresses it, the priests are training a reflex, experience without expression. When it is finished, her skin is raw and unfamiliar, and she understands why mirrors are forbidden here. Recognition would interfere with progress. Next comes purification. She is lowered into a bath of natron solution, the same substance used to preserve the dead. It burns living skin with a steady, consuming intensity that leaves no room for thought. The chanting tightens, repetitive phrases driven into her awareness, while pain keeps her mind open and defenseless. You are becoming empty. The foreign woman is leaving. The vessel remains. The words repeat until they echo, even when the mouths stop moving. When she is lifted out, trembling and gasping, the priests note her breathing, her pupils, her responsiveness. They are not checking on her well-being. They are measuring yield. The next days are quieter and more destructive. Kier is ordered to speak about her life, her family, her education, her memories of home, while the priests listen without reaction. When she finishes, they tell her calmly that everything she said is false. Each time she insists it is real, a correction follows. Not dramatic violence, but precision. Confinement in a space too small to straighten her limbs. Thirst that cracks her lips. Sudden cold that overwhelms concentration. The lesson is not to convince her that her memories are lies. The lesson is to teach her that defending them causes pain. Eventually, her arguments shorten, and they stop. They bring objects taken during her capture: jewelry, clothing, a letter written in a familiar hand, and require her to destroy them herself. Fire consumes proof of her past, while the priests watch for hesitation. The most damaging moment is not the loss, but the act. Participation binds guilt to memory, making the past feel dangerous to touch. The chamber alternates between absolute darkness and overwhelming noise, hours of silence followed by blinding light and pounding drums. Time fractures. Thoughts lose sequence. By the end of the severing, Kier's memories feel distant, unreliable, like stories she once heard about someone else. The priests document the outcome with satisfaction. Identity markers weakened, resistance reduced, suitable for transition. As she is led away, unsteady and unsure how long she has been below, Kier grasps the most terrifying truth of the chamber. The pain was never the goal. The goal was to make her unsure of who was suffering. The opening, the priests call the second stage the opening, and it begins only after they are satisfied that something essential has already been loosened. Kier is moved to a different chamber, wider and higher, arranged with deliberate symmetry so that it feels purposeful rather than punitive. This is not mercy. It is strategy. Humans endure pain by searching for meaning, and the priests understand this well. The walls are covered in ancient symbols, prayers carved so deeply they seem permanent, and the air is warmer here, scented with oils instead of ash. Kier is bound to a central altar, restrained just enough to prevent movement, and for the first time since her descent, she is addressed as though she matters. The chanting slows. The voices soften. Her body is treated with careful attention as oils and pastes are rubbed into her skin. Substance is absorbed gradually, dulling edges of sensation and bending perception without fully extinguishing awareness. The room begins to feel unreal, distances stretching and collapsing, her thoughts slipping away before she can finish them. This is the condition the priests have been preparing her for. In this state, they begin to speak differently. They tell her she was never truly Kier of Mitanni, that the life she remembers was temporary, a foreign presence now removed. They repeat this calmly, endlessly, until the idea stops sounding like an accusation and starts sounding like an explanation. They tell her she has always been meant for this place, that her suffering was proof of suitability, not injustice. When doubt surfaces, pressure is applied to her body in precise ways that produce waves of sensation, not enough to cause panic, just enough to keep her suspended between discomfort and relief. Then they show her others. Women who have completed the process are brought into the chamber, moving with an eerie calm, speaking with voices that sound practiced and distant. They call her by a divine name she does not recognize but does not reject. They speak of peace, clarity, purpose, and for the first time since her capture, Kier feels something close to relief, not because she believes them, but because belief would make the pain stop. The priests reward small compliance with warmth, water, rest. Resistance is met not with rage, but with confusion and renewed intensity, as if defiance is simply a misunderstanding to be corrected. Days blur. Kier begins to repeat phrases she has been taught, at first mechanically, then with less effort. The priests note this carefully. They are not interested in obedience alone. They are watching for the moment when the words stop feeling foreign. In rare moments of clarity, fear surges through her. The awareness that her thoughts are no longer entirely her own, but these moments are brief and punished by renewed intervention. Gradually, the chamber becomes her entire world, and within that world, the priests define reality. By the end of the opening, Kier no longer thinks in terms of escape. She thinks in terms of readiness. When asked who she is, she hesitates before answering, and that hesitation is recorded as success. The space inside her is widening. Something is leaving. Something else is being prepared to take its place. The binding. The priests call the third stage the binding, because by now persuasion is no longer enough, and what has been opened must be fixed into place. Kier is brought into a chamber stripped of ornament, reduced to bare stone and function, because beauty has served its purpose and is no longer required. The work here is not about belief, it is about reflex. She is instructed to speak her former name, to describe her family, her homeland, the life that once organized her thoughts, and each time she does, pain follows with mechanical certainty. It is not dramatic or explosive. It is exact, repeatable, and timed so precisely that her body begins to anticipate it before her mind can intervene. Soon, the mere idea of her previous self produces nausea, tension, a tightening in the chest that feels like danger. The association is deliberate. Memory becomes a threat. In contrast, when she uses the divine name assigned to her, when she speaks as the priests have taught her to speak, relief arrives just as predictably. Water is given, warmth is restored, rest is permitted. The lesson is simple and devastating. The old self hurts, the new self protects. Over hours that stretch into days, Kier no longer needs to be corrected. Her thoughts police themselves. The priests reinforce this with people rather than instruments. Women who have already completed the process are brought to her, not as guards, but as companions. They speak softly, calling her sister, welcoming her into a shared purpose that replaces isolation with belonging. They demonstrate what acceptance looks like in this world calm. Certainty, the absence of inner conflict, and when Kier hesitates, they respond not with punishment, but concern, explaining that confusion is a symptom of clinging to what must be released. This social pressure is constant and inescapable. Isolation broke her. Community now holds her. By the second day of binding, she notices something that would have terrified her earlier. Thinking of herself as a vessel feels easier than thinking of herself as a person with a past. The complexity of grief, anger, and loss collapses into a single directive serve, and that simplicity brings a dangerous sense of stability. The priests document the change with satisfaction, noting decreased reference to prior identity, increased emotional regulation, improved compliance without external reinforcement. On the third day, they test her. They present fragments from her former life names, places, words in a language she once mastered, and watch closely. She feels a faint ache, distant and dull, like a memory of pain rather than pain itself, and then nothing. She answers calmly, without recognition, and the priests exchange glances that signal completion. The binding is successful when the subject no longer experiences her former self as something worth defending. When asked who she is, Kier pauses, then gives the name she has been taught. No punishment follows. No correction is needed. Relief settles into her body, warm and undeniable. Somewhere beneath that relief, something essential is gone, but the binding has done its work well. She no longer knows how to look for it, and more importantly, she no longer feels that she should. The proof of what remained after the binding, the priests stop trying to change Kier and begin trying to confirm that nothing inside her can change back. This stage has no formal name spoken aloud because it is not ritual in the way the others were. It is verification. Kier is moved through corridors beneath the temple that she has never seen before, passages used only when outcomes are being assessed, where senior priests observe without intervening. She is dressed in clean linen and marked with symbols that signal completion and progress, and she walks without resistance, without curiosity, without the questions that once defined her. The priests test her carefully. They speak the name she once answered to, not sharply, not cruelly, but casually, as if it should mean something. It does not. They describe scenes from her past with deliberate precision, details that once would have stirred memory or emotion. She listens politely, confused by the expectation that these sounds should matter. Her lack of response is not emptiness to the priests. It is success. They record her reactions in the same detached language used for decades, comparing her to hundreds of others who passed through these chambers before her. Kier is then brought into controlled public spaces, rooms where selected worshippers and petitioners are allowed to witness her presence under supervision. She is instructed to speak words given to her, to move in ways rehearsed until instinctive, and she does so without hesitation. The effect on those who watch is immediate and predictable. Fear softens into reverence. Doubt collapses into belief. Offerings appear. The priests observe this without surprise. This is why the system exists. Not devotion, but influence. Not faith, but authority sustained by living proof. Kier feels none of the manipulation. She feels purpose, and purpose has replaced identity. She sleeps deeply now, without dreams, waking without memory or longing. In rare moments, something stirs beneath the surface, a vague pressure without shape or name, but it fades quickly, leaving no trace strong enough to disturb her calm. The priests are satisfied. They compare her stability to others who failed at this stage, women whose former selves resurfaced unpredictably, whose fractures made them unusable. Those cases are discussed clinically, as warnings, their records marked with symbols indicating deviation or loss. Kier receives no such marks. Her transformation is consistent. Centuries later, long after these chambers are sealed and the temple above ground is reduced to ruin, fragments of the priest's records will be uncovered by scholars who struggle to categorize what they are reading. The language is too systematic to dismiss as myth, too procedural to explain as symbolism. Residue scraped from stone altars will match substances known to alter consciousness. Skeletal remains will show patterns of restraint and confinement inconsistent with labor or punishment. Underground rooms will be mapped and found to erase light, sound, and time with unsettling precision. The most disturbing conclusion will not be that cruelty occurred, but that it was refined, repeated, and preserved as knowledge. Back in the living temple, Kier is declared stable and prepared for final installation. The priests begin arrangements for the last ceremony, confident that what they have created will endure. What they never record is the cost measured in absence, the vanished futures, the erased selves, the quiet bodies that continued to function after the person inside was already gone. The completion, the final stage, is called the completion, and unlike everything that came before it, it is not designed to hurt, persuade, or test. Those tasks are already finished. The completion exists to make the transformation official, to lock it into history and ritual so that it can no longer be questioned, even by those who created it. Kiar is led into the deepest ceremonial chamber beneath the temple, a space larger than the others, lined with stone polished smooth by generations of repetition. Torches burn steadily, their light reflecting off gold inlays and carved symbols meant to suggest permanence and divine order. Senior priests are present now, men whose power depends on results, not belief, and their silence carries more authority than chanting ever did. Kiar is dressed in white linen and adorned with markings that signal her new function. She feels no fear, no anticipation. Emotion has become unnecessary. The ceremony begins with confirmation. She is asked questions meant to reach into the past names, places, memories that once shaped her identity. She responds with genuine confusion, unable to locate any meaning in the sounds. The priests observe closely. There is no flicker, no hesitation. The past no longer registers as loss. It registers as nothing. That is the final proof. What follows is described in surviving records with deliberate restraint, not because it was gentle, but because it was considered sacred. The texts speak of installation, of union, of service commencing. Kiar is required to demonstrate what she has become, to speak and move as a vessel rather than a person. She does so without effort. To her, these actions feel natural, as if this role explains everything that came before. When the ceremony ends, there is no celebration. The priests are not sentimental. They are satisfied. The next morning, Kiar is brought above ground for the first time since her descent, introduced to the visible world as something holy. Worshippers kneel. Offerings are placed at her feet. She delivers words prepared for her, and people listen because belief needs an object. Over the following years, she will serve the temple faithfully, consulted by nobles and commoners alike, her presence reinforcing the authority of the priesthood and the system that created her. The records note her consistency, her calm, the absence of deviation. They also note her decline. A wasting illness sets in gradually, her body deteriorating without obvious cause, a pattern common among those who underwent the full protocol. When she dies at 33, she is buried with honor, remembered as a sacred vessel. Her original name is never recorded. Centuries later, fragments of these records will resurface, translated with unease by scholars who recognize something chilling in their precision. What the priests practiced was not madness disguised as religion. It was control refined into tradition, identity treated as a resource, and cruelty justified by belief. The final truth history struggles to confront is not that ancient people were brutal, but that they were organized, deliberate, and convinced they were right. Kiar's story does not end in escape or justice, because those were never possible outcomes. It ends the way the system intended, with a functioning body, an empty self, and a society that called the result divine.